I'm going to show you how to capture a mini globe panorama. The result is a photo where it looks like you've captured the world in one photograph. But really, you're just capturing wherever you're shooting, whether it's your back garden or out in the desert. And this is where I'm going to be shooting. I'm shooting in the garden here. So we're going to talk about how to set up your camera, and we're going to talk about how to shoot this in the garden too. So my camera is set up at the moment. Now, these camera settings are not going to be relevant for you, but I'm going to show you my process. I'm using manual mode and I'm using manual focus. I'm going to set the focus so that I'm focusing about 10 feet, let's say maybe 3.5 meters into the frame, because I know that f6.3, where I've currently got it set, most of the photo is going to be sharp at that point. And I'm using manual mode because we've got the shade over here and we've got the sun over here. I know that when I shoot there and I shoot there, the exposures are going to be different. If I use a priority mode, well, then what's going to happen is I'm going to have the exposure change in between the shots, and I don't want that because that actually makes it a lot harder to stitch together. I'd rather have an area that's two stops overexposed and 2 stops underexposed, but I've shot in RAW and I can recover that later to create one awesome photo. And if you use the latest versions of Lightroom, you can actually create panoramas that the end result is a raw file. So you still have all of that raw detail, and you can go ahead and recover those highlights and shadows later on. So yes, some of these photos are going to be overexposed or underexposed, but that's okay, we can recover it later. It's best to shoot in manual for this. I'm shooting here in the garden, and we're actually in a fairly large garden, but I've put my tripod quite close to the house. You see, the reason I've done that is because anything that's close to the tripod is going to look more exaggerated and better in the photograph, which is why I've brought some garden furniture and a little football goal close to the camera. Had I shot in the center of the garden, right in the middle of the photo, there would have just been loads of grass. And because everything is stretched and accentuated, you're not going to see the further away details in quite as much strength. So bring your tripod closer to whatever it is you're shooting, because it will look better in the mini globe. It will look more exaggerated. And now let's just finally talk about how we're going to shoot this. So it's a panorama, so shoot in portrait. The reason we shoot in portrait is because it's going to give us that extra height in the photograph. And what you're going to do is you're going to take a series of panoramas, and every time you take a new photo, it should overlap by about 50% just to be safe. I've switched here to the 5D and a 14mm because I have a really wide angle lens for this camera, which I don't for the 1300D. You can still do it with an 18mm on the 1300D. It's just going to take a lot more photographs. You just need to keep taking photographs until you've got pretty much every aspect captured. We're also shooting on a pretty clear day. At the moment, it's just some very wispy clouds in the sky. That's going to make the sky really easy to stitch together, whereas if you had a load of clouds, you need to shoot a lot more. So I'm probably only going to do 2 full panoramas. One where I'm facing down and I'm capturing the grass around me and I'm going all the way around, and then one where I'm facing up and I'm seeing the top part of the house, the sun and the sky. And then that's going to stitch together at the top so it looks like it's just the sky. And that's really easy to do. But what I'm trying to say here is you don't need to capture every single square meter. You don't need to capture what's underneath the tripod. That will be stitched together later, no problem. And you don't need to capture what's directly above you. A couple good panoramas where you get the ground and the sky, and then anything that's uniform like the grass and the blue sky does not need to be captured in such great detail. So I'm going to do 2 panoramas all the way around, maybe 3. And if you're not using a wide angle lens, you're probably going to do 3, maybe 4. The process is simple. Now I'm going to get rid of the camera crew and I'm going to shoot the panoramas, and then we're going to go to the computer and we'll stitch them together. I've imported my photos into Lightroom and I need to make them into a panorama. So I'm going to select the panorama images, select all of them here. Then I'm going to go to Photo, Photo Merge, and Panorama. We'll give this a minute, and what it's going to do is it's going to create a panorama for me. It's going to do it all within Lightroom, and then it's going to provide me with a raw file that I can use afterwards. If you don't have one of the later versions of Lightroom, such as Adobe Lightroom CC, then you may have issues with not being able to do this inside Lightroom. You can still do this inside Photoshop, and it's very simple too. I'll show you that process also, but I want you to know that Lightroom does a really good job. Photoshop does a really good job. It doesn't really matter what you use. If you do have an old version of Lightroom, that's perfectly fine. We can still do it the other way. So I'll let this load now. It's going to create a panorama preview. And here we can see a created panorama. And you'll notice at the bottom here, we have some white and we also have some at the top. We can remove this by using boundary warp. Now this is only in Adobe Lightroom CC. If you are using CC and you don't see this, this is one of the newer features, so you need to upgrade your software. I'm going to use that. It's just going to stretch those parts of the images to the edges. And then when I'm done, leaving it on spherical, I'll hit merge. And here's one I made earlier. I'll show you how to do this in Photoshop now. Open up Photoshop, go to File, Automate, and Photo Merge at the bottom, and then browse for your files. So I'm just going to use, I think, 3 images for this because it can take a while. Leave it on auto and then hit OK, and Photoshop will do this panorama for you. It does a pretty good job, but I do prefer Lightroom because it provides you with a raw file that you can then use to edit further. Here you can see it's finished stitching for that section of the panorama. Let's go back to Lightroom now. So this is the finished panorama that was merged inside Lightroom. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to right click and go to Edit in Photoshop. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Image and then Image Size. I'm going to copy the width, leave the image unlinked, and then set that as the height. And that's going to seem a little bit weird, but this is all part of what needs to be done to do a proper miniature globe panorama. Now that the image is all stretched out, we're going to go to Image, Image Rotation, and 180 degrees. We want to flip this on its head. Now, we've really messed around with this image now. It looks all screwed up, but this is what we want. We now need to add the polar coordinates effect. To do that, you go to Filter, Distort, and Polar Coordinates. And this is what you should see. You should see in the middle your starting point where you're standing your tripod. All you have to do now is make sure rectangular to polar is selected and hit OK. And just like that, we have our miniature world panorama. For me, I'd like to add some finishing touches, so I would probably go and edit this image again by doing image rotation 180 degrees. Flip this so the house is at the top now. And then I might also use some of Photoshop's advanced tools, for example, Content Aware Fill, to remove myself from this lawn here. This is going to be a bit rudimentary, but we'll give it a go. I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and Content Aware. And we can see that I've now disappeared, leaving a rather interesting finished panorama. You can also crop this and do any of your regular image editing that you would traditionally do, but this is a finished image and I'm really pleased with it. Thanks for watching. I encourage you to give it a try. You can do this in your back garden right now, I'm sure. And all I want you to do when you're done is just leave us a photo. We'd love to see it and share the images across our community. Thanks for watching.